Twinkle, twinkle, twinkle. Good morning. And just so you guys know, we've already called dibs on Pastor Dave's offer for babysitting, so got to find someone else. Absolutely. Think about the conversations you've had with people in passing over the last, week, month, year, maybe last 5 years. Think about those conversations as you see them in passing. Hey, so-and-so, how's it going? And the typical response that generally follows, I'm good, I'm just busy. I'm good, just tired. Maybe it's like, it's good, nothing new, just kind of stressed. Or some variation of these answers, busy and tired. These answers seem to be omnipresent, seem to be universal, a universal sentiment that everyone tends to carry with them all the time, that things are okay, but they're busy and they're tired, and that never seems to change. It never seems to get any better. It never seems to get less tiring. It never seems to get less stressful. It never seems to get less busy. And you could spend every waking hour pouring into your obligations and the considerations that you have in your life, and yet you never seem to catch up. You never seem to have enough. And you can't help but think, I have to imagine that God intended for us to have more than this. One can't help but think, this can't possibly be all that God has for us, can it? And I would say that the answer is no. Something has got to be missing. Something has got to be missing from our lives, that us, even as Christians, those of us who say, I trust in God, those of us that say, Jesus is my rest, we confess it and we believe it, and yet something is missing from our lives. And I believe this morning that thing that is so consistently missing from all of our lives, even those of us that trust in God, that believe in God, that believe that Jesus is our Savior, is the Sabbath. Now, we've been going through a series called Unplug and Amplify. We've been talking about spiritual disciplines, things that maybe cause us to unplug from the world, cause us to check out so that we can get our heart right, and other things that maybe we press into so that the love that's inside us, the God that's inside us, can be amplified in our own hearts and in the lives of the people around us. The Sabbath, I believe, is unique, and Pastor Dave brought it up last week, that this one, I believe, falls beautifully between both of these concepts, that it's both a concept of unplugging and simultaneously a concept of amping up, of amplifying what's in our life. Now, as I began to study this out, the more I studied it, the more I looked into it, the less qualified I felt to even talk about the topic, let alone in a single, one-part series. This could easily be a 10-part series, and I could easily spend years studying the topic. But we don't have that. We have this 1 week, and so I'm going to do my best. Growing up, having grown up in the church, grown up as a Christian my whole life, fairly extensively reading the Bible, and I thought I had a pretty firm understanding of what the Sabbath was. But only a short while ago, a friend of mine, in no connection to this series that we're doing, gave me this book called The Sabbath by Abraham Joshua Heschel. And it's up on the screens if you guys want to write that down. I highly encourage that you guys get a copy of this book if you can. Abraham Joshua Heschel, he did pass away, but he was actually a Jew. So he was not a Christian. But as I read through these pages, I began to perceive the Sabbath in a way that I never have before. And as that new perspective began to take place, I began to crave the Sabbath. I began to fall in love with the concept of the Sabbath, as opposed to just understanding the Sabbath, as opposed to just knowing about the Sabbath. It began to be something that I so desperately wanted to encompass into my life. And so I will, with no shame whatsoever, be quoting many things from here, because again, I'm not going to attempt to try to reinvent the wheel. He's so poetically and perfectly put so many things. Half this book is highlighted. and honestly, the other half should be highlighted too. I just need some gap in between the highlights. That's the only reason why everything's not highlighted. So I very much encourage you to do that. We will be going through this today, but again, there's just so much more that I can't possibly go into as we, peek into the depths of the topic of the Sabbath. But before we get too far, the real question maybe for some of you may be, what is the Sabbath? What is that word? If you're new here, or you're new into this thing that we call Christianity, that word may be something that you've never heard before, or it may be something you've heard and you've never really had a lot of context around it. So what is the Sabbath? And honestly, what isn't the Sabbath? Well, let's go back to the beginning. Genesis, the genesis of the world. Let's go back to Genesis 1. The very first verse of the very first book of the Bible says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and earth." And now we're jumping from the first verse to the last verse of this chapter because we don't have time for all of that. And it says, "And after all the creating that God did, after every day of him doing all these things where he created light, and he separated that light from the darkness, and he created land, and he separated the waters from the waters, and he created beast and flying thing and things that lived in the sea," after he had done all of his creation, after 6 days of creating, we see, it says, "And God saw that everything he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning the 6th day." So in this verse, we kind of get, this is our belief for the creations of the earth. This is our belief as Christians for the origin of species. And you may be listening to this message right now, and you may be coming from a very different perspective where you believe something different happened. Maybe you grew up and you believe, in the Big Bang. And that's where you believe. That's okay. As Christians, we believe in a Big Bang too. We just believe that the bang was caused by something. We just believe that in order for something to become everything, there had to be something greater than that something to create it. And so I highly encourage you that if you begin to look into the science behind this, that we're not just blindly believing these things, but there's actually a lot of science, a lot of cosmology, a lot of just different things to back this up. For example, just one quick thing, again, not to get off topic, but I want to make sure that certain people may not just automatically tune out as I'm going into this mythology, that we can see, or the typical belief is that everything condensed into a dot smaller than a period, and then all of a sudden it exploded out, and everything sent everything spinning in centripetal and centrifugal force. And so now everything is spinning. Now, that could make a lot of sense, except for the fact that we can actually witness the fact that there are certain planets, and almost everything in the galaxy is orbiting in the same direction, but there are a couple things that are actually orbiting in the opposite direction. And I believe that God put those things in place just to stump the scientists that would say it all happened just by a great spinning. So just really, really neat stuff there, that there's a lot of validity scientifically to this. And so we see that God created everything in these 6 days. And then it continues on in the next verse, or the next chapter actually, and it says, "Thus the heavens and earth were finished, and all the host of them, everything that was within them was created as well. And on the 7th day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the 7th day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done." And so we see here that he is laying out the Sabbath. That word rested there, the word rest there is the word Shabbat. Shabbat, technically. It's where the Jews got the word Shabbat from. And Shabbat is the Sabbath. That's where we get the word Sabbath. The Sabbath is the 7th day of the week. Now, many Christians may be under the belief or understanding that today as we gather on Sunday morning, that this is Sabbath, but it's actually not. The Sabbath actually takes place on Saturday, or more specifically, because the Jews believe the day starts basically in the evening when the sun sets. As it says, there was evening and there was morning the first day. There was evening and there was morning the second day. So their day actually begins in the evening once the sun sets. And so they believe that from Friday evening until Saturday evening, but you could basically just say Saturday is the Sabbath. Now, the early church understood this. Obviously, most of the early church were Jews. But they chose to honor the the 8th day, or basically the first day, Sunday. Sunday became the Lord's Day. So we understand that Sabbath is Saturday, but the Lord's Day, the day that we come together as a congregation, that we worship to celebrate the freedom from coming out from under the law, the celebration of the freedom we have in Christ, of the resurrection of Jesus, is on the 8th day. And so it's just important to make that distinction. And this is our gathering day. So the 7th day, which is Saturday, became the Sabbath. Now, let's fast forward a few millennia to where we see God speaking to Moses, who at the time that Moses was alive, he was the leader of the Jewish people. And through Moses, God had led the Israel people out of captivity. They had been enslaved for 400 years in Egypt, and God brought them out through Moses. Now, he brought them to Mount Sinai, and at Mount Sinai, he gave something called the 10 Commandments. And let's look at those 10 Commandments. This is in Exodus chapter 20. And this is God speaking to Moses. And he said, and God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. So he establishes by making it aware who he is, what his heart is. And I think about like what Matt was saying is we can't even comprehend the mercy that he has, the love that he has for us. And so he's establishing this here as like, listen, I am the Lord your God, the God who cares about you. I brought you out of the house of slavery, not into another house of slavery. I'm not here to bring you into another house. I'm not looking to start a nation of slaves. I'm not looking to keep that. I'm not looking to lay rules down on that type of nation, but a nation of sons and daughters. So he brings us out of slavery and he brings us into sonship. And he says, he begins laying out the commandments. He says, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall have no other gods before me. And so often we think about this as, just being other idols, Buddha or something like that. But it is so easy to overlook the fact that the everyday things in our lives so quickly and easily become gods in our own lives. I think it's the more dangerous thing because it's so easy to overlook because it doesn't look like a god. It just looks like a tool. It just looks like entertainment. But we become so addicted, so entrenched in it that we can't even let it go. We believe in our own minds that we control it, but the truth is it controls us. And so he says, see to it that you have nothing in your life that controls you, that dictates what you live, how you live it, and when you live it. And then he goes on and he says, and you shall not make for yourself a carved image. So he's building off of this last thing he said. You shall not go in and explicitly make things, engraven images, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven, which is the sky, or that is in the earth beneath, or in the water under the earth. You shall not bow to them or serve them. So again, let's not be extra blatant about it, is basically what he's saying here. And he continues on, and he gives the third commandment. He says, you shall not take the name of the Lord in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. And then he says this, remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy, to keep it set apart, to keep it consecrated. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath. It's a resting day. Again, that word means to cease. It's a day where everything ceases. The seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. And on that day you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servants or your female servants, not even your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. He consecrated it and he set it apart. Now, before I go too much on that, I want to continue on with the next couple set of verses really quick. He says, and honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. I just want to bring attention to the fact that in the same amount of verses that I just spent talking about the Sabbath, he covered murder, adultery, stealing, covetousness. He spent 3 or 4 words talking about murder. You shall not murder. Boom, done. We would think, right, by the order of importance in our own minds, that there would be an entire paragraph on murder. We would think that there would be an entire paragraph on theft. And yet, we see these things, first and foremost, listed after the Sabbath, and secondly, spent with hardly any time at all. Now, I'm not saying that they're not important, but what I am saying is, how important then must the Sabbath be? That God would mention, the only thing God mentions prior to the Sabbath is making sure that we have no other gods before him. That first we make sure that no one is in control of, and then the very next thing is that we make sure that we make time to rest in him. In fact, there are more words. There's 98 words within this passage spent talking about the Sabbath, about honoring and keeping the Sabbath. The second closest one is the one right before it, and there was only 91 words there. So understand that, especially in rabbinical teaching, order meant something, the way in which you did it. I mean, even today, you can understand by the amount of time somebody spends talking about something, how important it is in their lives, right? You've never seen a conspiracy theorist that only talked about it one time, right? You know, you try talking to them about anything, it's just like, have you seen the weather today? Yeah, but yeah, have you seen those streams in the sky, those, what are they called now? Chemtrails, have you seen the chemtrails in the sky? And then you spend the next 4 hours talking about chemtrails, or, man, how about that presidential election? Yeah, but JFK, am I right? You know, they spend all their time talking about it because it's important to them. And I believe that he spent such a huge portion of these rolling out of these commandments because it was important to him. He listed it out first because it was important, even over making sure that you don't go around killing people. God felt that it was important to highlight that we rest on the Sabbath day. And now, some of you may be thinking, if you've been in the church for any amount of time, you may be saying, yes, but Nick, this is the law, and we're Christians, we're in the new covenant, we're not under the law. Don't you know this, Nick, that Christ came and he fulfilled the law? Now then, I would ask you, well, what does it mean to not be under the law? And what does it mean for Christ to have fulfilled the law? To not be under the law, which I agree we are not, it means that we are no longer under the judgment, no longer under the condemnation that came with the law. That it also means that we are no longer held in a place of bondage where we, by necessity, must follow after the flesh, which was doomed to fail, doomed to have an inability to walk within the law perfectly. So yes, we are in a place where we understand that the law does not give us our right standing. The law is not responsible for the righteousness that I have within me. That I attribute that all to God and his grace. However, not being under the law, does that mean that we become lawless? See, the law was truly fulfilled. Christ came and he did fulfill the law. But again, what does it mean? Now, when we say that word fulfilled, it literally means to fill to the full. It was filled to the full, meaning that he achieved what the law was attempting to get us to accomplish in the first place. That he did in the Spirit what the law was always trying to get us to do. What was the goal of the law? Many people miss this part. This part you don't want to miss. What was the goal of the law? Sure, Paul says that the goal of the law was to point out our sin, to reveal the fact that we had sin within us. But more specifically, more importantly, why? was the law established? Why did God do this? I think in order to understand it, we have to back up and understand a little bit of context around what happened just prior to this. So as the Jewish nation approached Mount Sinai, which is where he gave these 10 commandments, he had prophesied to them. He said, you will come and I will come down and I will descend on this mountain and I will be your God and you will be my people and we will have a loving relationship with one another. We're going to live in connection. You will be a nation that walks in communion and connection with me. And so they roll up to the mountain and they see fire and they see smoke and they're like, whoa, I just remembered I have something to do, but Moses, if you want to maybe go up there and just, see how he's doing, we'll be right here. So the Jewish people, upon seeing him, began to fear and tremble, and they rejected him. They rejected the connection. They rejected the communion, and they sent Moses up as a liaison. They sent Moses up as a go-between. And so God had to communicate with them. And so I think about this with our children who, I've got a 2-year-old daughter and a 3-month-old son. And the communication barrier is sometimes there. Sometimes we find ourselves becoming a little remedial. Sometimes we become just very explicit, right? So all the time I find myself saying, don't touch the stove, it's hot. Or don't go in the street. Don't hit your brother. Don't or share your toys. Listen to mommy. All these types of things, very explicit commandments. But am I telling them to do these things just because I'm trying to see how strict I can be? I'm trying to make her fall into line? Or is it because in the best way that I know how to communicate my love to her, that I want to make sure that she's loving herself as good as she can. She's loving others around her as best she can, and she's showing me the love as best she can. And so, while I'm not saying, I need you to love me, I need you to love other people better, what I'm doing is giving a list of things to help teach her and train her into walking in a place where she's walking in love for herself, walking for others, and walking for those in authority around her. And so God, when he gives these commandments in lieu of real connection, it was always a backup plan to the true connection that he wanted to have. But since they refused to converse with him directly, they refused to be in communion with him, he said, okay, listen, I'm going to give them these 10 commandments. And if you look at those, you can see so clearly that it was to teach us, to try to get our actions to align in a way where we would love others better, love ourselves better, and love God better. That's ultimately what it was about. That's everything that God was trying to achieve through the law. In the same way that we do it ourselves, that when we give commandments, when I lay out laws for my daughter, it's because I don't want her to hurt. I want her to grow up and have good connections with good people, and I want to have a strong relationship with her because I love her. And so I lay out things to try to protect all of those things. But the problem came down to is it became following the letter of the law and missing the spirit or the heart of the law, that people became really good for the most part at doing the external actions, but missed the internal part. Now, when Jesus came and fulfilled the law, he did it by aligning his external actions with his internal motives. And that is what we do. When we fulfill the law, when we align our external actions with internal motives. And in the same way that love would never override the ability to not murder. It would never, because the law is fulfilled, never stop us from committing adultery. It would never stop us from stealing. Would never, maybe I'm phrasing that wrong. It would never allow us to continue doing these things. In the same way, we should understand that the Sabbath, which was the most talked about point here, should be fulfilled where the external actions align with the internal motives. And so, while we are no longer under the law, it's not that we're absolved from honoring these things, but doing it in a way where we fulfill them by doing these things fully through love. Does that make sense? And so we view the Sabbath in the light of Jesus. And this is how I see it, that grace produces right standing beyond our strength. But the Sabbath produces the strength to stand rightly. Grace, which is the thing that God gave us, the unmerited favor, the equipping from God that came so that we could have right standing. Our righteousness before God is not in and of our own strength. It's not in and of anything that we did. But it's because of the grace that came and abides within us. It's the grace that we have. However, the Sabbath, this important thing, it produces in us the physical and emotional strength to be able to stand rightly. Throughout the week, it gives us the strength. We're not trying to do it to obtain right standing. We already have that. But sometimes what we lack is strength. Sometimes what we lack is strength within our bodies. We are just so tired. We are just so weak. It's like we're unable to get through the week. I just need to take a nap. And sometimes we lack the strength within our souls, our mind, our will, our emotions. It's just so drained. It just doesn't have it in us. And so the Sabbath, this day, once a week that we get to come back to, where we cease everything, it recharges both our bodies and our souls. And so we don't do it out of obligation, but we do it because it's a gift, like all the other spiritual disciplines that we talked about. That while discipline without direction is drudgery, we realize that there is a direction that we're heading towards here, where there is an end in sight, where those conversations don't have to end off with, I'm good, but I'm tired. I'm good, but I'm stressed. I'm good, but I'm just so busy. That the direction that we have in mind, that God had in mind for us, is that we wouldn't have to live where those things exist as a perpetual truth for us. And so I want to go through 5 things, 5 benefits of honoring and keeping and remembering the Sabbath. The first is that when we keep the Sabbath, we ensure that our priorities are in check. We ensure that our priorities are in check. And if we go back to Exodus 20, to the first and second commandments that he laid out, the only 2 that came before the Sabbath, he says, you shall have no other gods before me. And you shall not make for yourself a carved image. You shall not bow down to anything in this world or in heaven. Make sure that you have no other gods before me. And so when we keep the Sabbath, we say, okay, time is not going to become a god for me. Work is not going to become a god for me. Entertainment is not going to become a god for me. Parties and fun things and all the other stuff, or even the drudgery that comes, none of it is going to become a god for me. And while these things may be important and I'm going to give them their proper attention in their proper time, it will not surpass my need and my desire to pursue God and to honor the commands that he gave me. We've become like servants of doing, right? We're human doers instead of human beings. And no one is happier for it. No one is happier for it. No one is happier being that preoccupied. And the biggest objection, that half of you have probably already said, I just have too much stuff to do. You have no idea how busy I am. You will make time for what's important to you. It ultimately comes down to this, that if you make time for the Sabbath will make time for you. If you make time to rest on the Sabbath will create time. You will find time in places you didn't even know existed. That you will somehow manage in 6 days to get what you get done in 8 or 9 or 10. And you will do it with more fervor and energy and life within you than you did before. So give yourself permission to do what God commanded out of love. He commanded it because, like when I tell my daughter, don't touch the stove or don't hit your sister, he did it for love. So give yourself permission to do what God's commanded. Say, I give myself permission. Say, I give myself permission to do what God commanded. The second thing, when we honor the Sabbath is that we unburden ourselves. We unburden ourselves, again, body and soul. That from a physical exhaustion and a mental exhaustion, we unburden ourselves. Matthew, this is Jesus speaking, and he says, Jesus says, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. I will give you Shabbat. I will give you Sabbath. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." Who needs rest for their souls? Who needs rest for their souls? My God, for years I have been craving rest for my soul, and I have been searching to God, and I can't understand, no matter what I do, I can't seem to find the rest that I know He has for me. And He says, you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. My burden isn't a burden at all. The things that I obligate you to aren't obligations at all. You will see in time that these things are gifts that you will get to live in a way that no one else gets to live, because you live in ways that no one else lives. And we see the Apostle John commentate on this concept too. In 1 John, he says, "And by this we know that we love the children of God, when we love God and obey His commandments. For this is the love of God, that we keep His commandments. And His commandments are not burdensome. For everyone who has been born of God overcomes the world." These burdens, these obligations that we take on when we say, "I'm a follower of Christ," when we obligate ourselves to doing the things that He said He was going to do, it says these things are not burdensome, but actually by doing them, it proves that we love Him. And in doing so, we overcome the world. The world which is currently overcoming us, we overcome it through our faith. I told you I was going to be quoting some things from Abraham from the book The Sabbath, and this is one of them. He says, 6 days a week we wrestle with the world, wringing profit from the earth. On the Sabbath we especially care for the seed of eternity planted in the soul. The world has our hands, but our soul belongs to someone else. My mind, my will, and my emotions, they belong to the Father. And he says 6 days a week we seek to dominate the world. We seek to do our own plans, to follow our own and to pursue our own purposes. But on the seventh day, when we submit to Him, we try to dominate the self. The self that creeps up to convince us that, well, we don't need to do these things. It's not a big deal. Or I can, in my own strength, get me to the places that I'm trying to be mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. I can get myself there if I try hard enough, if I have enough tenacity. But on this day, on the seventh day, on Sabbath, it's a day for dominating self, for saying, okay, the last 6 days I did what I wanted to do, but today, God, I am resting for you, and I know in my pursuing of resting to you, to honor your commands, you're going to give to me all that I've been trying to do anyway. And then when we submit and honor the Sabbath, we find that we actually imitate God. When Jesus says to follow me, and we see that Jesus said, everything I do, it's because I see the Father doing it. That ultimately, Jesus was imitating the heart of the Father. And so we see that when we do the Sabbath, we actually begin to imitate God Himself. We go back to Genesis and we see that on the seventh day, He did 3 things. He finished His work, He rested, and He made the day holy. He sanctified the day. 3 things. And so when we keep the Sabbath, when we honor the Sabbath, first we finish our work. We put our pursuits on pause, whatever they may be. Whether they be things that we have to do, or things that we need to do, or want to do. We put them on pause for 24 hours and say, God, this time is yours. And we rest. We renew our strength. We renew our will. We renew our tenacity and the fervor and the light within us. We rekindle it. And we make it holy. We sanctify it. That word holy just means to be set apart, to be different. We ensure that that day looks different than all the others. See, on all the other days, God was doing, God was creating. But on that day, not because he was tired, but because he was laying out a blueprint for the rest of the universe to follow. So that we are truly created in his image. And as image bearers, we choose to rest as he did so that we can be more like him. That we become more like God in the moment that we rest. And in that moment, we also experience his presence. Now, I know on Sunday mornings, we experience his presence all the time. The worship team is incredible at leading us into a place where the Spirit flows in here in a palpable way. Amen. But we get to experience his unbridled presence. We get to see the fullness of who he is. Because the quieter we get, the clearer he gets. The quieter our hearts are, the quieter our lives are, the quieter our minds are, the more clear he gets in our own lives. Psalms talks about this. I've used this verse several times, probably in this series, but it just doesn't cease to be true. He says, be still. That word be still means cease, desist, stop, and know that I'm God. Know with an intimate type of knowing, with an experiential knowledge. Perceive me. Absorb my presence. Another quote from this book, Abraham says, some religions build cathedrals or temples, but Judaism constructs the Sabbath as an architecture of time. Creating holiness in time requires a different sensibility than building a cathedral in space. Right? So, in our lives, this physical world, this tangible world, is the realm of space. It's what we understand, it's what we know, it's what we see and perceive and we think about. Our minds are consumed with the world of space, of building things out in space, of accumulating money within the realm of space. And even our religion sometimes becomes a religion of space, right? Where this building, this is a holy place. This is a special place. That there are special places on the earth, special mountains, special, whatever. But it's interesting that the first time God ever called anything holy, it was a moment in time. It wasn't a person, it wasn't a place, it wasn't a thing. It was a moment in time. And so we need to understand that the goal of religion, the goal of this walk that we find ourselves on, is not to go from experience to experience, or to go from gained piece of knowledge to gained piece of knowledge, but to find moments in time that are sacred and to live out that experience. To sanctify that moment where we can be alone with God, where we can be committed with him, where God's presence is more palpable there. That is where religion becomes real. When we go from knowing things and understanding things to experiencing things in moments that God set aside to be with us. And the last thing is that, and this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but the fifth thing that we have is that we find the purpose of life. Now, this may sound crazy. This may sound that how in honoring the Sabbath and keeping the Sabbath that we find the purpose of life. And I felt that the best way to define this is just by going to another quote that he said that blew my mind as I said it, that totally blew up my paradigm for thinking about this. He said, man is not a beast of burden, right? He's not a cow. He's not a tractor, right? He's a man, and the Sabbath is not for the purpose of enhancing the efficiency of his work. So yeah, you will become more efficient if you take time to rest, but that's not why we do it. Last in creation, first in intention. The Sabbath was the last thing to happen, just as we were the last thing that he created, but we were first in his intention. That he thought about us above all else. It says the Sabbath is the end of creation of heaven and earth. The Sabbath is not for the sake of the weekdays, right? We don't rest on the Sabbath so that we can get through the week. We get through the week. The weekdays are for the sake of the Sabbath. It is not an interlude, but the climax of living. It's the climax of living. The thing that for generations we have entirely avoided is the very purpose for living. And yes, there is so much to do that we minister the gospel, but this is that opportunity that when there are no distractions, when there are no other pursuits, but to experience God in an unbridled way, in a way where nothing else is fighting for it. That is the goal, to meet God, suspended in time, just Him and you. If there is anything that can give you the strength to walk out the week and to walk out that week uprightly, both with strength and with dignity and integrity, it is experiencing God face to face once a week, where there's no other obligations but experiencing Him. But it comes down to trusting Him. Are we going to trust ourselves, or are we going to trust Him and what He says and what He promised? I can tell you from myself that in trusting in myself, I felt physical stress, emotional exhaustion, mental fatigue, and spiritual complacency. I have felt that I am, as much as I love God, at times on pace for an early death, because there is no rest for my soul. In spite of my trusting in God, where is the rest for my soul? And God is saying, since the foundations of the earth, the design, the blueprint for all of the universe is this one special day where nothing else needs to happen but to rest. So how do we begin in keeping the Sabbath? What does it look like? Well, first, I encourage you that whether you're listening online or whether you're sitting in the pews, start the conversation. Start the conversation as you're driving home, as you're walking into your kitchen, or as you're eating brunch, whatever it may be. Start the conversation about how much you want this, about how much you're seeing the need for it. And there are three simple things. I call it the 3 S's for keeping the Sabbath like a boss. Stay intentional, sanctify your time, and soak it up. Stay intentional. Pick a day. Now, the traditional day for Sabbath is Saturday. But I believe that we do have a freedom, even though I have a personal belief. I believe that there's a special dispensation of grace on that day. That's just my own personal belief. I believe that you just need to pick a day. Maybe that is Saturday for you. Maybe that is another day. But pick a day and keep it. Put it in your calendar and block out that time. Other things that you can do to enhance it. Cook your meals beforehand. Clean your house beforehand so that all you have to do is heat it up. It's just ready for you. Limit your driving and move expectations and obligations to different days. Let it become the focus, the primary things, that all other things flow around it. Like the way water flows around rock, the Sabbath can become the rock of your week, and everything else is just water that quickly comes and quickly goes and will return once again, but it quickly flows over. Let the rock underneath the water be the thing that shapes your week. Sanctify your time. This just means make it special, make it unique. My family, we started to light 2 candles that just remind us to remember and to keep. And again, you don't have to do anything special like that, but say a prayer. Welcome the Sabbath in as it begins to be something that you crave and you look forward to. Maybe tell the story of the Sabbath to remind yourself, to remember why you do this. Be intentional about it and soak it up. This is the fun part. God gave us this because He loves us, not because He's trying to burden us with something that's just going to put us behind, it's going to make us miss out on other things, but He did it because He wants us to enjoy time with family and with friends. So enjoy time with family and friends. Eat, sing, tell stories, play games, and nap. And just take that time every week. And I promise you that when you do the Sabbath in conjunction with all the other spiritual disciplines we've talked about, fasting and prayer, silence and solitude, all of these different things, as you begin to press into them, as you begin to study out the Word and memorize it, that all of these things will work together in a way where you truly experience the love and the rest of God for your bodies and your souls. Amen? Amen.